Okay, I'm here with Dr. Roy Jackson, who's the course leader for Religion, Philosophy and Ethics at the University of Gloucestershire. And I'm going to ask him a question that was sent me by a teacher in Chelsea, who is working with her OCR A2 students. And the question that she asked was, if God knows all our moral choices in advance, then we cannot justly be blamed or rewarded for what we do, can we?
No.
Okay, that was quick.
There you go. Well, yes, this is... okay. This is a quote. This quote is assuming that this is a God who, by knowing our moral choices, he also has the power to do something about it. So we're talking about, again, the classical view of God here. God as all-powerful, as all-knowing, and all-good. So it's the usual problem that would go away if we just changed our idea of this kind of God. And it ties in with the problem of evil, to some extent. You know, people do bad things. And they can't be blamed because God allowed it.
So if I robbed you,
yes.
if I went to your office and nicked all your stuff, and then you came and blamed me, I said, well, God knew I was going to do it and didn't stop me.
Yeah, absolutely.
I could, he could have done at any time could have stopped me stealing all your gadgets, but chose not to.
Yes,
and therefore allowed it to happen.
That's
it's
right.
not my fault. It's his.
Not your fault. He allowed it, and in fact, quite possibly even caused it, in that sense. So you're free. Yeah. Now, of course, seeing God in this sense, it's therefore paradoxical and it's irrational. It's irrational to accept these attributes of God and also accept that we are morally free. So, how do we get around this? Now, there are ways around it, or attempts around it, to argue that we can have an all-knowing and all-powerful God, and you can have people being responsible for their moral actions. Why? Because they have free will. So this is the key here. I think the key here is we cannot be morally responsible for our actions. You know, as the quote says, we can't be justly blamed or rewarded unless we are free to choose our actions. God gives us freedom to choose. We are morally autonomous agents. Why? Because, well, lots of different reasons why, but one reason is because we would not be fully human unless we learn from our mistakes. So we're it's our human nature to be depraved. And some would say this fits perfectly with the classical idea of God. You know, God is firstly omnipotent, but he has the power, therefore he has the power to make us be moral agents or not. He's omnibenevolent, he's all good, because he's giving us free will because it's for the good of mankind. We might not see it that way, but that's the greater good, if you like. And also, thirdly, he is omniscient, he's all-knowing, because he knows we will commit evil acts, but it's us who are doing the choosing. Now, okay, now that might be the sort of the simple fit here, but we need to pick up again, going back to the quote. This idea of if God knows, and what we mean by knowledge here. That's the key one of those attributes. This idea of omniscience.
This kind of foreknowledge and omniscience, and marrying them together proves.
Yes, that's right. It's the real problem here, because we need to be clear what we mean by this. Because obviously, if God knows the future, then doesn't the future have to be? Therefore, I have no control over my future, and so I'm not free. You know, if God knows I'm going to, we talk about stealing things from my office. I'm going to steal things from your office. I'm going to steal this mug from your desk here, this Leicester City cup mug. Then God has presumably known I'm going to do that since the beginning of time. Because God knows everything, so he knows that. If that's the case, then there's no way I can escape from doing that action. It's already known, it's predestined.
So you weren't truly free in the sense that you mentioned a minute ago, and we need freedom to get us out of the problem.
Yes. But if the knowledge of that happening is there already, then I can't be free. Now, how do we get around this? Now, again, there have been attempts to do this, and I want to look just very briefly at that three attempts, but just very briefly. But I think what we'll see with all three of these attempts, that either you end up reinterpreting what we mean by God, or what we mean by knowledge. I think you have to do one or the other, and that's the problem with all three of them. Firstly, the first one, we go back to the 5th century with Boethius, who argues really that there's no such thing as knowledge of the future for God. No such thing as foreknowledge, because he sees God as timeless. Okay, God exists outside of time. Therefore, to say that God will know what occur in the future doesn't make any sense.
Because for being outside of time, the past, present, and future are all laid out. There isn't a future of things that hasn't, for them, happened yet. I guess.
Yeah, that's right. Yes, it doesn't make it makes sense to us. I mean, we obviously we're living through time.
But we're inside, not outside.
Yes, we're inside time, and also it probably also makes sense to talk about being free. But for God, outside of time, it's not relevant in any way. So it means I could steal your mug and say I'm doing this freely, and I'm doing it in time. But for God, that doesn't make any sense at all. God just has knowledge, pure and simple. It's as simple as that. Problem with that is, again, as I say, it does kind of alter perhaps many people's conception of what God is. Many would regard God as more sort of personal, acting in time, involved in time.
It's the active bit that it seems to kind of edge you away from the kind of active bit of many people's conception of a theistic deity.
It becomes pretty much an inactive, abstract, philosophical God. Which
the God of the philosophers, not the real,
that's right,
not of
that's
people.
Right, that's right. So people are not too happy with this. So is there a way where we can maintain this more classical personal view of God, and maybe instead look at how we understand what we mean by knowledge? So secondly, we can move forward in time 1,000 years to a Jesuit thinker by the name of Louis de Moliner, who argued that, this is in the 16th century, that God knows what would be the case if. He calls it middle knowledge. This is the idea that I am free to act in a given situation. Now, what he means by this is really, surely omniscience is really having knowledge of all possibilities. That's really what omniscience should be. Surely it's not just one thing, but it's all possibilities. So my choice to steal your mug is determined by a given set of circumstances. But if those circumstances had been different, I could have done something different.
And your choice, your moral choice, would be part of that kind of nexus of factors that led to your choice.
Yes, absolutely.
It's your fault.
Well, but is it? I think this is the issue, because again, to what extent, how far do you go back in those set of circumstances? Because I think the problem then is, are there really any other possibilities?
Do we end up with something that looks very much like determinism?
Yes, absolutely.
You had no choice but to do it because various factors impinged on you and were always entrained to do so.
That's right, yes. The if thing is, if I'd never been born, would there then be possibilities for me in this life? There wouldn't be, because I hadn't been born. So in actual fact, given that God has to have knowledge of something, he can't have knowledge of things that actually could never occur. Yeah. So again, there's problems with that. Thirdly and finally, then, we can go right to the 21st century now, or late 20th century, really. But William Lane Craig argues, in actual fact, that God can know what I'm going to do freely, and I can do it. I mean, he gives an example of, he says, God knows that Jones will mow the lawn because Jones will mow the lawn, though Jones could have chosen not to. Now, that doesn't seem to make very much sense to me anyway. He basically argues that God's knowledge follows Jones's actions like a shadow, right? But then he also says that chronologically the shadow precedes the event. Okay, so if I give the example of the mug again, what he seems to be saying is that I just decide now to steal your mug. Nearly spill water all over me. God knew I would do that just before I did it, whether it's milliseconds or whatever. But I could now decide not to.
Yeah, I think for me, the Lane Craig version of it is quite evocative, the idea of it following like a shadow, but actually, once you think about it, the least convincing. But that's just personal interpretation. You kind of talk them through.
Well, yeah, because I suppose, I think the problem with partly is because doesn't it actually limit God's knowledge again? Because, okay, he might know what I'm about to do now, but presumably it means he won't know what I will... An hour ago, he wouldn't have known that I was going to steal your
if
mug.
we'd asked God an hour ago, in 50 minutes,
yes.
will Roy steal my mug?
Yeah.
And I've been and asked him if
yes.
he could do such things.
Yeah.
He wouldn't be able to tell. Tell when? So you introduce lots of peculiar factors like how soon.
Yes, absolutely.
And if he knows that suddenly you're just about to, pull out a gun and kill me, he didn't know anything about that either.
No, exactly.
Yeah,
yeah.
It seems very kind of.
So it limits his omniscience, which is.
It seems an attempt to kind of square the circle that doesn't really seem to succeed. In fact, these suggestions we had earlier, thinking about God being outside of time, seem at least to make more sense, even if they don't satisfy classical theism.
Yes, exactly. We have to change our idea of God to some extent, otherwise we're kind of trapped. So in actual fact, in answering the question, if by God's knowledge we mean we have no moral freedom, then yes, we cannot be justly blamed or rewarded because we are nowhere responsible for our actions. But the if here is really dependent upon what we understand by God and what we understand by knowledge.
So it throws us back on those key terms as thinkers to try and think, do we mean what we think we mean by God, and do we mean what we think we mean by knowledge?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.